Hi everyone, and a belated Happy New Year. I'm Kaze with a K. Recently I've been watching a lot of videos about fighting game roster building and about, well, Fire Emblem and Smash. FE and Smash has always been a touchy topic by people who care way too much about hyper-corporate platform fighters, and I think the problem, massive air quotes, has been addressed several times by people saying, well, why doesn't Fire Emblem just get its own fighting game? And while this is all well and good, I feel like a lot of fan rosters for a Fire Emblem game are either much too large in size, which is fine because it's a fan roster so they can add whoever the hell they want, or they don't really address the Fire Emblem and Smash problem. That being, it's kind of a Lords and Swords fest that doesn't really highlight a lot of the aspects of the Fire Emblem series. In all honesty, I only sort of intend to fix that. More than anything, as a huge fan of both fighting games and of Fire Emblem, my main intention going into this thought experiment is to make a roster that is diverse for both fighting games and Fire Emblem fans. This doesn't just mean I want to slap a bunch of characters into archetypes that don't necessarily suit them just for the sake of it. I took time to really examine the way these characters feel as units and the general energy they provide to determine what they would bring to my fighting game roster. Plus, with Fire Emblem Engage having recently dropped and celebrating certain aspects of the series, I figured I'd do the same, in my own quirky hyperfixative way. With that in mind, I've assembled a roster of 24 characters plus 2 bonus characters, making 26 characters. And even if I don't have choices in my roster that you necessarily agree with, I hope that at the very least you'll understand why I made the decisions from a balanced roster building aspect. Lastly, because Fire Emblem Engage is pretty recent and I haven't finished it yet, I've decided to opt out of adding any units from that game to my roster, at least for now. If I revisit this at a later date, maybe I'll add a few. But I think we should hold our horses for just a second. It's not really easy to talk about a fighting game concept without having the gameplay as a foundation to build that concept off of. So let's talk about that. When establishing a concept for a fighting game, the first thing you really want to determine is how your game is going to be played. For example, how many characters will there be on screen at once? On what plane is the game played in? How many buttons? How are inputs handled? Well, to be honest, I'm not thinking too in depth right now. It's not like I'm going to have full movesets for each character, just general ideas of game plans and movesets. But it does help to define the limitations for the sake of consistency and for potential future reference, so I'll roll through these kinda quickly. This unnamed Fire Emblem fighting game will be a 2D 2-on-2 fighting game. Characters will have 3 primary attack buttons, a simple light, medium and heavy, and a 4th button dedicated to using assist moves, as well as a 5th button for swapping between your characters. Probably a shoulder button on a standard controller. You can use special moves with motion inputs, but I don't think the motion inputs would be anything crazier than what you'd see out of something like Under Night In-Birth, or for the less FGC savvy viewers, a Smash Bros guest character. I'd probably call special moves skills and EX skills respectively, and there'd be a basic super meter, which I would probably call the special gauge to go with FE's terminology. But just to keep things simple here, I'm calling special moves, and super meter. I went with 2-on-2 due to Fire Emblem's emphasis on supports and the more recent usage of pair-up mechanics. Plus, I think a tag fighter allows the game to trade mechanical character depth for a system that rewards game knowledge and good use of character synergy, which I think works really well for Fire Emblem. On that note, I'd like to implement a mechanic that rewards frequent use of your teammates by giving you access to stronger tools. I decided to tie this to Fire Emblem by making it a support system. You start the match with no support, then as the match goes on and you use partners more often, your characters build C support, then B support, and finally A support. If you're familiar with BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, this is pretty similar to that game's resonance gauge. Other partner related mechanics include a pair up gauge, which sort of acts as a cooldown mechanic for assists. On that note, there would also be mechanics like an active switch because, well, it's a tag fighter. And there would also be a mechanic similar to bursting, which I've called Miracle Counter. By pressing the 3 attack buttons while being hit, your teammate will come in and interrupt the opponent's combo. If you hold the button, your point character will stay tagged in, but just tapping it will cause you to swap to your anchor character. Using it will fully drain your power up gauge, and using the version that keeps your character in play would also cost some of your super meter, because I feel like it's kinda strong to just keep your point character in, especially if Miracle Counter gets baited. Lastly, I'd be adding in other universal mechanics too, like short hops, air dashing, universal reversals and overheads, and push blocking, as well as reverse beats, mostly because rebeats are really fun to play with, especially on a casual level. I think I'll also add auto combos because honestly it's 2023 and we should stop whining about optional game mechanics that make a game more accessible. I think that just about covers the gist of the general gameplay mechanics. My key inspirations behind the gameplay mechanics were BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, Marvel vs Capcom Infinite, Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax, Under Night In-Birth, and Arcana Heart 3. Now that all that mechanical mumbo jumbo is out of the way, I'm going to be honest and say that most of you watching are only interested in a certain aspect of this concept, that being the roster. So I guess we should get to that. Just as an FYI, the roster building process took so long that I actually need to split this video into 2 videos, so there's your warning, you won't see the whole roster today, but you know what to do if you want to see the next part. Creating a roster for a fighting game is difficult, especially when you're working with a pre-existing property. It's hard to conventionally fill standard fighting game archetypes while staying true to those characters. For example, picking character archetypes like the Shoto, the Zoner, the Grappler, and the Rushdown, especially in the context of Fire Emblem, a series where units only tend to act a specific way in combat, and more than that, a series where a solid chunk of the units are mounted. I don't know if you noticed this, but it would be very jarring to have a guy on a horse in a 2-on-2 fighting game. But despite not picking a whole lot of mounted units, I did try to make use of their mounted nature for the moveset. I'm going to list off each character, explain why I picked them, and for those of you who are looking to get into fighting games, if these character concepts interest you, I'll also list off characters from fighting games who inspired my concepts and therefore might appeal to you. I guess the first place to start is on our very first character, and our standard Shoto character.
No one can say what the future holds, but if the 2 of us are together, nothing can stop us.
For my Shoto, I decided to go with Corrin. In Fates, Corrin is your main lord and a fully customizable avatar, which gives her an edge over other characters with each of these distinctions. Because of this, Corrin is a really flexible character to work with. I also specifically went for the female version of Corrin because that's what intelligent systems would do in this situation, I think. In traditional fighting games, Shotos tend to have 3 key features: an easy to learn playstyle, a balanced game plan, and a fireball, dragon punch and approach option that helps them pass projectiles for their special moves. In Smash Bros alone, Corrin has all 3 of these things, so it's really a matter of applying it to a more traditional sense of gameplay. For example, her approaching special would probably be based on her corkscrew spin. While I wouldn't have her water orb keep enemies in place, maybe the EX version could do that. As for her DP, I'd go for an upward sword slice with multiple hits, seeing as Yato lends itself really well to being a multi-hitting weapon. Despite her strength at mid-range, she would also lean slightly towards favouring aggression, since beginner-friendly characters tend to favour aggressive playstyles, and I think that works since casual players just kinda wanna run in and hit things, which isn't a bad thing. The goal behind Corrin is making her an easy character to pick up and learn the fundamentals with, while also still being a visually interesting character to watch. She's not too high concept, but I hope the idea came across anyway. If you like Corrin, I would suggest trying out Ken Masters in Street Fighter, and Gran in Granblue Fantasy Versus. As to not just list off characters in archetypal order, I'll come up next by covering one of the game's zoners. Fire Emblem has no shortage of extremely good choices for zoning characters, so I did have to incorporate a little bit of personal bias in my choice for this one.
No matter what world I find myself in, I'll be fine, as long as you are by my side.
The resident zoner of my Fire Emblem fighting game is Lumina. Lumina is definitely one of the more iconic mages in the Fire Emblem series at this point, and I think that, even stowing away my personal love of the character, there are a few other choices I'd go with for my key zoning oriented character. Lumina compensates for her low health pool and mediocre normals with extremely potent zoning tools and command normals. Her key zoning tool would be a simple yet effective fireball, the speed of which would vary with the heaviness of the button pressed. This fireball would also be one of her assists, allowing a safe approach option for her teammate. Her other magic specials would be based on Bolganon and Bolting, with each triggering at a different effective range based on the button pressed. Bolting would also be able to be held down and charged, which would allow it to become an overhead, and Bolganon will always hit low, with its EX version covering the entire ground rather than just a specific spot. Lumina would also boast superior getaway and anti-zoning tools, with a reflecting spell that bounces projectiles back, as well as a warp which allows her to break away from opponents approaching her too hastily, with the setback of the teleport itself being pretty punishable. This warp is also her only reversal option, meaning that she might struggle in wake-up situations. If Lumina sounds fun to you, I'd suggest trying Athena Asamiya in King of Fighters, or Mikoto Misaka in Dengeki Bunko. The next character I want to cover is on the complete other end of the table, being a character who would rush in and get things done kind of aggressively.
I'll protect you no matter what. Just stick close to me.
Lyn is, simply put, fast. Although not the fastest character in my roster, she's a very controllable level of fast. The aim of Lyn is to make her the most beginner-friendly character in the game, owing partially to the comparatively lower difficulty of Lyn mode in her actual game. She's a great introductory character who would be designed to be approachable to non-fighting game players. She's the key simple rushdown character with an easy to understand gameplay flowchart of approach, mix, overwhelm, and her visually appealing special moves would allow her to move speedily at extremely beneficial angles to close the gap and help her achieve this flowchart. She additionally has an air unblockable bow based projectile which isn't terribly strong, but it does its job of keeping opponents from approaching her before she approaches them, as her linear offense and lack of reliable defensive options would make turning their offense into her own defense rather cumbersome and should probably be avoided. Although optimized to be the lead character in a team, Lyn also has pretty strong assists that help her teammate to juggle well, meaning she'd probably work well with a hybrid zoner so they can each cover each other's offenses and approaches. If you're interested in characters with an easy to understand game plan, decent normals and good melee oriented rushdown, my key inspirations for Lyn were Cammy White from Street Fighter and Shiki Tono from Melty Blood type Lumina. Next, I decided I wanted something more technical, a style of gameplay that's really out there, and there was no better choice for that kind of playstyle than a puppet character. However, puppet characters aren't something you can just come up with. Creating a character who controls another character is, shocker, really damn difficult. For a moment, I did consider an Erika Ephraim duel as a full-on puppet character, but as I explored the archetype a little more, I just didn't think it could happen. As I struggled to come up with something, about to give up, it hit me. Invoke is a spell that exists.
I feel safer with you around. Watch my back, okay?
This is definitely the first choice on my roster that people are going to raise their eyebrows at, so let me explain. While an Invoke user is the perfect choice for a puppet character, people might be wondering why I specifically went with Jenny over Silk or Tatiana. Well, it's partially to do with the puppet archetype from a design standpoint. Puppet characters, more often than not, are very dainty and childlike in appearance. Of course, there are some famous puppet characters who differ from this, Zato, but I thought it was a fun theme to work with, and Jenny with her puppet being an invoked soldier just seems like a really fun idea. Jenny is a character with a low health pool and basically no defenses at all, but this is made up for the fact that, well, she's a puppet character. In a 2-on-2 game, this essentially means that if she locks down someone in the corner, she can have 3 people on them at once. That's kind of insane. Her soldier would have its own health bar and a significantly lower health pool than any playable character, as is the norm for puppets. The soldier can't be comboed normally or thrown, and it has armor on its attack animations, meaning attacks can't be interrupted conventionally. However, Jenny needs to use the soldier tactically, as it running out of health will turn a 12th of her maximum health into recoverable damage. Her special moves without her soldier, while strong, are very limited. Having Physic, which would heal her soldier or her teammate if it's used as an assist, and Expel, which allows her to voluntarily recall her soldier back to her position, which will prematurely respawn it if it's been killed. When used as an assist, Expel would simply have Jenny stand in the arena for a few seconds, and if the opponent uses their assist during that time, she'll automatically damage the support and cancel its action. While Jenny's assists are extremely strong, she loses health whenever they trigger, much like standard white magic in the Valentia games. Jenny is an extremely unique character, but puppet characters used as her primary inspiration for the playstyle include Carl Clover from BlazBlue and Ken Amada from Persona 4 Arena Ultimax. Now let's talk about mix-ups, highs, lows, the 50-50s, all that fun stuff. There are quite a few mix-up oriented characters in this roster, but I think the resident mix-up character title can only go to one of them.
I will not lose, not as long as you and I share this bond.
The next character on the list is Lucina. I think Lucina is one of the least surprising picks on this roster, and that's because I think she lends herself really well to a 2D fighting game. I'm not just saying that because she was in Smash, it's more like the way she animates over the course of the series just has an energy that seems like it would be incredibly fun to put players in direct control of. Lucina would focus on converting good footsies and mid-range into an aggressive rushdown game plan which, while not overly aggressive and high damage, seeks to overwhelm her foes by pushing them in the corner as fast as possible and then making them have to constantly guess on their wake up. She would achieve this with her Rekka style moves. For those uninitiated, a Rekka is a move with multiple parts that require you to repeat the same input or add more inputs in a sequence. Lucina's primary Rekka special would be a simple one, a series of slices that lets you follow up in one of three ways. A low sweep that hits low, a jumping slash that hits overhead and floor bounces crouching opponents, or a thrust that puts her on the other side of her opponent on hit, which would mostly be used as a combo extender and her main assist move. She would also be able to do a similar Rekka series in the air that could follow up into her grounded version. Besides Corrin, Lucina would probably be the most well-rounded character introduced so far, having good mid-range options and an actual DP, which is evidently a rare commodity to come by in this roster so far. Lucina would be fast, but not necessarily play fast, instead opting to wear down her opponent by calling out the poor footsies and defenses in their playstyle, instead of rushing in and KOing a character in 2 or 3 combos. If the idea of a rushdown oriented character who gets rewarded for good pressure and mix-ups appeals to you, I suggest trying out Arcreed in Melty Blood type Lumina, or Chris in the King of Fighters. Picking a grappler for a Fire Emblem fighting game feels like it would be way easier than it actually is. Since I was avoiding engaged characters, none of their brawlers could fill that spot, and the more I thought about it, the more I just didn't want my grappler to be in the brawler class. Sorry, I know Balthus is literally called the King of Grappling, but it just didn't feel right to me, especially since I felt that Balthus would be a hybrid grappler if anything. I know how stupid it is to look past that, but when I figured out which character I wanted to include in his place, things just kinda fell in line.
After all is said and done, we are both murderers, both stained.
As a mild spoiler going forward, despite me saying that this roster wouldn't be a Lord's Fest, you'll probably find that the Fodlan representatives are a bit on the predictable side. This isn't out of any weird desire to keep the Three Houses roster from being too wild, but it's more just because the main characters provided exactly what I wanted out of this concept, and Dimitri is no exception. Dimitri is the resident grappler in this game, and while I primarily just picked him because of that one cutscene where he dispatches a bunch of addressed ranged soldiers by mostly grabbing them with his bare hands, after reflecting upon the grappler archetype itself, I just feel like he fits perfectly. To keep a long story short, grapplers in fighting games are often associated with fear, due to the fear of being punished for a bad option by an insanely powerful command throw. The idea that a post-timeskip Dimitri who is still in that brooding, ruthless mindset is an archetype built around instilling fear into his opponents is just too good to pass up. As the archetype's contemporaries would imply, Dimitri is a character with slow movement options, having a slower walking, running and forward jumping speed than the rest of the characters. His slow movement is offset by, of course, his big buttons and large health pool, which give him more than enough attempts to capitalise off of openings granted by his strong mid-range to get his real game plan started. Once he gets in, it may as well be over for his opponents as they are relentlessly battered by Dimitri's high damaging, consistent Okizeme. His key special moves include an advancing thrust of Arid Bar, which is projectile invulnerable in order to help him advance against zoners on his own, a standard highly damaging command grab, a less powerful one which helps him continue combos, and a third command grab which targets opponents in the area above him to make them scared to do much of anything in his overwhelming presence. This playstyle that focuses on big buttons, big pressure and fantastic vortex situations at the cost of high commitment is one that I firmly believe suits post-timeskip Dimitri to a T. If Dimitri's gameplay sounds interesting to you, I'd suggest playing basically any grappler in a fighting game ever, but if I had to narrow it down to a few, I'd say Waldstein from Under Night in Birth, and Orochi Yashiro from The King of Fighters. This concludes the 6 characters I feel best illustrate the roster building process of this thought experiment. These 6 make the perfect ground from which to build the rest of the roster with. With that in mind, the rest of the entries likely won't be as verbose as these since my creative process was already outlined, but rest assured that doesn't mean they won't pack their own punch in return.
I can't fight poorly in front of Erica.
No time for hesitation!
As was previously mentioned, I think when people think of a candidate for a puppet character for a Fire Emblem fighting game, Erica and Ephraim likely come to mind. However, I felt that making them a pure puppet character would be a disservice to them. Instead, they act as a sort of stance puppet hybrid character. You would start the round as Ephraim, with Erica following closely behind you. Ephraim sports a moveset that focuses mostly on the mid-range game, with primarily pokes, combo extenders, and tools to help close the gap between him and his opponent. However, one of his special moves is a little unconventional. The move has no damaging properties, but using it will swap the twin you're playing as to Erica, a character who focuses more on the close range game with Sieglinde, and Okizeme with her more potent magic than Ephraim's. Both characters share a health pool, have no reversal, and while you can swap the point twin before the start of the round, the animation for doing so during the round isn't instant and is therefore punishable when telegraphed. However, once these two get their offense started, it's pretty much game over for the opponent, as the two have their own distinct, equally strong arsenals leading them to one well-rounded character. Other notable duo-esque characters in fighting games include Hisui and Kohaku in Melty Blood, and Ziku in Street Fighter V.
I'm Tsubasa Oribe, age 18. Get ready!
Tsubasa is perhaps one of the odder picks on this roster, just by virtue of not being a main series Fire Emblem character, but like, who cares? Tsubasa's awesome. Tsubasa is a well-rounded, rushdown leaning character with a strong neutral game and good options for holding the opponent in place. Able to summon her Mirage Sida to lock the opponent down or contest their approach options, Tsubasa is a character who aims to make the opponent play the game her way and respect her high-low mix-ups until she wins. Tsubasa also has superior air mobility, boasting 2 air dashes and a triple jump, meaning she has a surplus of angles and scenarios to create when mixing up her opponent. Despite this, she can only take advantage of one of these options at any given time. In other words, the second air dash locks her out of her triple jump until she touches the ground again, and vice versa. Due to the presence of Sida, it's easy to mistake Tsubasa as a puppet character. However, that's not really the case, as Sida is more like a projectile or something in this situation. Sida taking damage will take a small chunk of green life out of Tsubasa's health, so her Okizeme would rely more on baiting out reversals and punishing them, or just going for big meaty hits on wake up. All in all, Tsubasa is a good choice of character if you just like zooming all over the place and probably frustrating your opponent in the process. The characters who inspired Tsubasa's concept include Celica A. Mercury from BlazBlue and Orie from Under Night in Birth.
I'll take care of anyone who gets in your way. Stay close.
Pretty much a shoo-in for a fighting game. Ike. Ike is a large yet deceptively fast character with strong disjointed normals, an above average health pool and pretty safe pressure options. While he focuses a bit more on the very fundamentals driven strike throw game, Ike is very much a rushdown character, though perhaps not on the same level as a character like Lin who pushes in, hits buttons, and prays. When he does get in, his combos can appear somewhat linear at first, being pretty standard Rekka strings that end in a couple of hits into a hard knockdown. His mix-ups are unorthodox but come at the cost of accessibility, as he lacks any sort of standing overhead or fast, safe sweep attack, meaning it would be pretty hard to open people up in his case without the use of assists. However, rather than rush in with mix-ups, Ike prioritises the stagger game, turning a corner situation into a methodical scenario where he restarts his offense if the opponent commits to a poor button or reversal option. Given his big buttons, high damage and extremely safe stagger pressure, I think a lack of mix-up potential is an acceptable trade-off. Although they don't match the big burly testosterone energy of Ike's design, Nanase from Under Night in Birth and Ramlethal from Guilty Gear Strive were my key inspirations for Ike's playstyle, so you should still give them a chance.
I will never hesitate to fight for you. I believe in you.
Celica boasts decent pokes and, more notably, extremely strong, fast and robust magic projectiles, but the downside of that game plan becomes clear when noticing their cost. Much like in Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia, Celica's magic costs her life to use. So while her specials and supers are stronger on paper than those of the rest of the projectile oriented characters, she needs to either use them sparingly or plan her offense meticulously. Sure, her Ragnarok super might be a full screen overhead, but it's very punishable on block and takes about a third of her health pool, meaning that using it incorrectly could literally take Celica out of the match in one combo. She does have a few notable features that mitigate this downside quite a bit. For example, she has a health pool more akin to Egg's, seeing as in her case more than anybody else's, health is more of a resource. Additionally, she does have a few ways to get this health back besides the passive healing from switching out. For instance, a Nosferatu command grab which steals health. While Celica doesn't actually learn this magic in her home game normally, it felt too integral for her kit to ignore. Additionally, she can heal herself with a powerful, albeit extremely telegraphed super, proportionate to how much meter she has at the time. As for the last downside, she can't go below 1 HP by using her specials, meaning that she can go as crazy as she wants when she's at low health, which owes to a sort of comeback factor. All in all, Celica is a more risk-reward oriented projectile character who needs to come prepared to switch up her game plan when the going gets tough. If that kind of game plan appeals to you, I'd consider Carmine in Under Night and Birth and literally nobody else.
I will become your shield. The enemy will not lay a finger on you.
One of my favourite kinds of fighting game character that I actually don't play very often is the guy with the huge body and hitboxes who just blitzes through opponents' moves with overwhelming moves and super armor. There isn't a character better for this role than arguably the most foreboding presence to deal with in Fire Emblem, the Black Knight. Also, Black Knight had to be in this roster somewhere. Anyone who knows me knows that he was going to be here, no matter what. Black Knight is a character with moderate speed and an absurd health pool. Rather than have a standard run, step dash or air dash, Black Knight can warp forward and backward. The animation is slower than the average step dash or air dash, but provides a decent chunk of invul frames in the middle and could probably be used for mix-ups and a more variable offense. As for his offense and defense, I mean, his entire deal is that his armor is basically impossible to break through, but in a standard fighting game scenario that's not exactly fun to deal with. With that being said, I think it would at least be something like guard points on the starting frames of his normal attacks. While these guard points prevent him from taking damage, they would probably get stuffed really hard by low attacks in order to keep them more on the balanced side, but that doesn't defeat the fact that Black Knight would be incredible at contesting buttons at the mid-range. Also, while his attacks would be relatively somewhat slow at first, they'd leave the opponent in hit stun for a while and lead to big damage combos. Additionally, some of his moves would be able to be held down to make them entirely unblockable at the cost of, you know, an extra like 40 frames of startup. His normals are huge though, so it would be threatening as hell to deal with, but I ultimately think it's fine because the charged version of the move wouldn't be practical in the slightest. His specials would likely consist of committal ways to help him get in, such as a stance that has him just walk forward with full projectile immunity, as well as a move which maybe costs meter but allows him to gain full armor on his next 3 attacks. He'd still take damage, but wouldn't go into hit stun. A Black Luna super that's basically a full screen grounded version of this that takes ages to charge but activates immediately upon his guard point being hit, while not practical, would also be a fun and gimmicky move to throw out. Black Knight's key inspirations were Sentinel from Marvel vs. Capcom and Vasaraga from Granblue Fantasy Versus, with a few things from Labrys from Persona 4 Arena for flavour.
I'll show you that together we can overcome anything.
Micaiah is a different kind of projectile character. Based on her Light Priestess version, she's less of a zoner and more of an all ranges character. Rather than focus purely on spacing with her projectiles, she uses them to cover her approach. For example, her projectile has a variable firing speed, which can be adjusted by holding back or forward when firing it. Additionally, it can also be curved up or down, and these two variables aren't mutually exclusive, meaning you could throw it slowly upwards, quickly downwards, or vice versa. It has a lot of startup, but this ability to change its speed allows Micaiah to mix up her opponent even from the other side of the screen. and also a very oppressive projectile for her teammate to switch into. This projectile would also do more damage the longer it's been on screen, so there is a reason to use the slow one as an offensive tool. When blocked, it deals block stun proportionate to how long it's been on screen. The other main part of Mikaya's kit is her unique movement options. Rather than a standard reversal, she has a command air dash that can be used diagonally up or down or straight forward. And it would have a hitbox on the opening frames, so it can be used as a juggle or air-to-air option. Her most unique movement option is that instead of having a standard run, she has something else much like Black Knight. In her case, it's a hover dash. Her hover dash sends her diagonally upwards for as long as she holds to run, meaning that she is in the air the moment she starts dashing. While her buttons are kinda stubby, her game plan doesn't really require her to play neutral in a way that could be considered normal, so I think it's fine. The amount of pressure Mikaya could put on her opponents with her variable offense, potential for pressure resets, and easy frame traps is nothing to be scoffed at. Her key inspirations are worn on her sleeve since she has a hover dash. If that sounds cool to you, Morgan from Darkstalkers and MVC, and Eno from Guilty Gear have you more than covered.
When I feel my courage falter, I remember you are at my side.
Before you ask, I wanted to include a Freysia character, and Nana just kinda spoke to me. Nana is a balanced, mid-range oriented character who is easy to use, kinda gimmicky and rewarding. She has no real projectile, but does come equipped with the lance sword and a couple of staves. Her primary gimmick is that her sword attacks, on hit or on block, heal a small amount of health. This health doesn't scale with the damage dealt, but it does scale the further a combo goes, so you're rewarded for more technical combos with more survivability. But even the bread and butters will feel rewarding. She does have a ranged special, just one that doesn't do damage, that being her staves, obviously. While most moves in this game have different properties such as damage and speed with their light, medium and heavy versions, these staves would have entirely different effects depending on the button pressed. The first one is the Berserk Staff. This would give the opponent a damage boost, however in return they take more damage and they can no longer block. Additionally, if their assist enters play, the assist can be hurt by them. This effect disappears after a few seconds or after Nana or the target enters the knockdown state. The second one is the Silent Staff. This disables the use of specials, supers and assists for 10 seconds or until Nana is hit or blocks an incoming attack. The last one is the Sleep Staff. The Sleep Staff prevents opponents from walking, running or jumping. Opponents who are hit while the sleep debuff is active on them will enter the counter hit state. The debuff deactivates when either character takes a hit. All in all, Nana is a support oriented, anger oriented character who are designed to be easy to pick up but still have lots of nuance and things to understand. She has big, strong buttons and access to things like a DP attack and some Rekkas, but she lacks ways to keep her opponents at bay besides Okizeme with her staves. Honestly, when I was originally drafting this roster, I imagined her as the sort of slightly more aggressive Shoto-esque character, but in actuality, she turned out to be one of the more unique characters in this roster. She doesn't have many key inspirations that are easy to spot, but the ones she does have are Ragna the Blood Edge from BlazBlue, and Nest's style Kyokusanagi from the King of Fighters. And there's a taste of the roster. I would have included the second half of the roster, but the script is getting absurdly long, so I figured the best thing I could do would be to make this a two-part video, the second part coming out within a few weeks of this one dropping. I think it's fair that way too. While producing the second part, I could look at the feedback I've received and maybe apply it to the remaining 13 characters. As an addendum, those characters have been selected, but I'd honestly like to theorycraft a season pass of DLC additions based on feedback, and you know, since the base roster didn't include engaged characters as I haven't finished the game yet, I think it's safe to say that I'm going to need to do a couple of them that do justice. Additionally, that would mean that I could cover some ideas that people have in the comments, like ideas for game modes or costumes or colour palettes. I want to do colour palettes. I really want to do colour palettes. In any case, I'm gonna go rest and then work on the next part. If you want to watch the next part as it comes out, consider doing the funny YouTube things. Hit subscribe, maybe follow my Twitter or check out my Discord, and be sure to share this video with others. I'd love to hear what more people have to say on this idea. Lastly, it feels weird that I haven't cursed as much in this video or made too many jokes, so Wagga baba bobo, fuck. Okay, bye.